It was on the storm-tossed shores of South Wales that a business empire was founded. The Welshman who built up the empire eventually expanded overseas. But his greed and his ambition left behind a litter of victims who claim he caused them nothing but misery.
I could have throttled him, I could have taken a gun to him and blew his brains out, because it shattered my life completely.
I've probably lost through this association something like £100,000 to £200,000.
Utterly ruthless. That's how you'd describe it. Utterly ruthless, yes.
The empire, originally based in Porthcawl, has hit trouble. Tonight, the victims speak out about intimidation, deception, and perjury. The man they accuse is Eric Morgan. We've tried to meet him on an informal basis over the past month. At the same time, he's put pressure on some of the people we've interviewed. He and his family have run businesses in the Porthcawl area for almost 40 years. It's there, among people that numbered him as a friend, that we begin his story. Jim Francis told us an associate of Morgan's suggested he'd get up to £10,000 if he didn't appear tonight. Jim Francis wants this programme to go ahead. Eric Morgan's deal with Jim Francis set a pattern for the future. They'd known each other for years. Morgan persuaded Francis to let him become a partner in a deal to buy the Esplanade Hotel on Porthcawl Promenade. Francis says Morgan deceived him. It left him a bitter man.
He was far, far too smart for me. He gets up a lot earlier than I do.
What do you think of him now?
Well, funny enough, I could have throttled him, I could have taken a gun to him and blew his brains out, because it shattered my life completely, you know?
Jim Francis didn't feel like that when he first knew Eric Morgan. They'd both grown up in Porthcawl. Francis worked occasionally for Eric Morgan's father. He became a familiar figure to the Morgan family.
I became a friend. His father was a deacon of a small little church in Porthcawl, and I went there. I knew the family exceptionally well, especially his sisters and his brothers. And yes, I would say that I was a friend of the family, yes.
Although he'd started as a carpenter, Jim Francis was ambitious. He became manager of one of the biggest hotels in Porthcawl, the Esplanade. The company who owned it went bust. The receiver offered to let Jim Francis buy the hotel, but he wanted £150,000. Jim Francis could raise only half that.
At that period, Eric came back into my life, because I hadn't had any dealings with him for a long, long time. He phoned me up one day and said that he understood that I was buying the Esplanade. Knowing Eric all my life, and knowing what a rogue he is, I decided that he wasn't the sort of guy that I would want with me in the Esplanade.
The Morgan family owned the Happy Valley caravan site, about 3 miles along the coast from Porthcawl. After his father's death, Eric Morgan became the driving force in the business. He expanded into haulage and property companies.
Although that I knew him well, that things had changed, that he got many companies, and he would be quite happy with part of the cake. That was the very words he said to me, that he would be quite happy with part of the cake. So by that, I assumed that he wanted to be a partner of the Esplanade. So I said, well, are you sure that you can get the money? No problem at all. He said, for me, I can get the money to buy the Esplanade. No problem at all.
The Esplanade deal was agreed. Jim Francis took Eric Morgan to see his solicitor, T. Brian Williams, in Bridgend. It was Williams who suggested they set up an offshore company to buy the Esplanade. Williams explained they'd pay less tax. The three men flew to Jersey from Cardiff Airport.
Further call for passengers travelling on climb 332 to Jersey.
For Eric Morgan, it was to be a turning point. It led to a new home in the Channel Islands and to international business links. They were to result in allegations of fraud and perjury. In Jersey, Jim Francis and Eric Morgan were taken by Brian Williams to meet another solicitor. His name was Richard Martin. For the next 12 years, Eric Morgan and Richard Martin were to work closely together. But in the beginning, Martin agreed to set up the offshore company to buy the Esplanade. Morgan and Francis really owned the company.
It couldn't operate unless somebody gave Martin instructions. And it was Eric Morgan and myself, through Brian Williams, gave the instructions. That's the way it worked.
The Esplanade deal meant Francis and Morgan had to pay £150,000. But first, they had to pay £15,000 deposit, which was non-returnable. Francis borrowed his half. Ultimately, he used his bungalow as security. The deposit was paid. Morgan had promised to find the balance, £135,000. He failed.
It proved very difficult to find him. He just seemed to disappear. And within about 7 days, I was coming up to completion. I found Eric. I stopped him on the road, actually. And he rolled his window down and he said, well, I've tried everywhere and I can't get the money. So, I mean, I was shattered, absolutely shattered.
The storm was gathering for Jim Francis. He'd lost his deposit and was facing mounting debts. About a month later, the receiver told him the hotel had been sold at a much lower price.
So I said, well, it's a bit of hard luck as far as I'm concerned, but I said, if it's gone, it's gone. And that's it. But it wasn't many days through the grapevine, I understood that Eric had bought it.
Eric Morgan.
Eric Morgan bought the Esplanade, yes.
But strangely, Eric Morgan's name didn't appear on any of the documents of the new company that bought the Esplanade. Jim Francis lost his job and any share in the hotel. The bailiffs moved into his bungalow.
A man arrived on the door and, being a bit new to it, he wanted to come in and he took an inventory of furniture and everything in there, and they took the lot, including the car that I own.
What were you left with?
Nothing. Not a penny.
Jim Francis fought back. He successfully sued his solicitor, Brian Williams. He then issued a writ against his former friend, Eric Morgan. But Morgan had disappeared again. It was some years before Francis saw him and spoke to him.
Eric, I said, if I ever get a chance, legally, to put you behind bars, I'm going to do my damnedest. And I said, you must be well aware of that.
Eric Morgan's dealings with John Smithson began in a familiar way. Morgan and John Smithson became friends, then business associates. Their biggest deal involved the old Gasworks at Port Talbot. By the end of their relationship, Smithson suspected Morgan was operating illegally. Morgan became angry and tried to put pressure on him.
He owned several nightclubs in those days, and he had, bouncers were there, and he used to get one or two of them positioned outside the house all the time that I was away, and it frightened my wife to death.
What, you were saying they were just sitting there?
They were just sitting there.
In a car?
In a car, menacing. And I tackled him over it, actually, after about a week of that, and he came with two of the people from the car into the house. And he started with the backup of these two people. He would never ever, he was always a coward and would always move away if there was any sign of anything physical. But with these, he actually came to me and he tore my shirt and started trying to act violent in the house with my pregnant wife there. And I got my wife to phone the police.
But it wasn't like that when they first met. John Smithson was a customer at one of Morgan's clubs. Later, he agreed to work for Morgan on a commission basis.
He would use me to front purchases of properties in the real estate for himself, where he would remain in the background until the signing of the contract.
Their biggest deal involved the old Gasworks site at Port Talbot. John Smithson agreed to buy the site on behalf of Eric Morgan for £210,000. But a few days before Morgan signed the contract and paid the deposit, he sold all the scrap on the site. He was paid £186,000 up front. Smithson was appalled.
I firmly believe he couldn't sell what he didn't physically own at the time.
And you're absolutely confident that that's what he did?
Oh yes, he took money for the scrap metal on the site before he had even paid a deposit on the property.
But it was an ice cream deal that brought matters to a head between John Smithson and Eric Morgan. A company called Valley Creameries, well known in South Wales, hit cash problems. It was run by Dan Tobin from Port Talbot. He'd known Eric Morgan for many years and counted him a friend.
He had a cash flow problem and he went to Eric Morgan to ask him if he would, give him a cash injection to help out. So Eric then formed a separate company to run Valley Creameries, asked me to become company secretary and sent me up there to oversee what was going on and said he would inject capital into the business.
John Smithson made changes in the company. He tried to expand. He persuaded Morgan to buy more ice cream vans. They were second-hand, bought at an auction in Birmingham. This was the ice cream deal. Eric Morgan bought Valley Creameries 26 vans. They cost £26,000 and went on the road. But what Smithson and Tobin didn't know was that Eric Morgan had secretly sold the vans. He'd sold them to a leasing company for nearly £40,000. He'd then hired them back to Valley Creameries. But Eric Morgan pocketed the profit. John Smithson went to the police.
I wanted to disassociate myself from the events that had happened, just in case he tried to pass the blame to me for the particular events with Valley Creameries, with vehicles that were purchased, because I believed that that was fraudulent.
It would have been a very nasty thing for him to have done, though.
He did it. It's as simple as that. It was done, and so I went to the fraud squad about it, because I wasn't going to get myself involved, apart from the money that he owed me.
From what you're saying, he seems to be a fairly ruthless businessman.
Utterly ruthless.
That's how you'd describe him?
Utterly ruthless, yes.
One of Eric Morgan's saddest victims was Paul Monks. Eric Morgan first met Paul Monks in 1959. It was 20 years later that Morgan persuaded Paul Monks to join him in a nightclub venture. They bought the 4 Sevens Club at Maesteg. Within 3 years, the deal had almost ruined Paul Monks.
At the end of the day, my personal loss in the company in cash was somewhere approaching £55,000–60,000.
What did that mean to you in personal terms?
Well, it's money I had saved, I had worked for. It was tax-paid money, which you can't replace very simply, can you? You know, it's hardship, it is, to lose that sort of money.
Their story started on one of the caravan sites owned by the Morgans. Paul Monks ran a confectionery business there. He dealt with Eric Morgan almost daily.
He was the person who ran the site in Happy Valley, and I got to know him very well over the years.
Again, was it a strictly business relationship, or did a friendship develop?
It was a business-friendship relationship. It was bound to be over that period of time, and working in that proximity.
Eric Morgan was involved with a number of clubs over the years. It was in 1979 that he persuaded Paul Monks to join him. Together they'd buy the 4 Sevens Club, one of the best known in South Wales. But Eric Morgan was planning to become a tax exile. He couldn't become too closely involved in the company. Nevertheless, Paul Monks had no doubt they were partners.
We were to put up an equal amount of money each, which was £15,000
Each.
which we did. And he was going to arrange to finance it from a brewery loan at very, very favourable interest rates at that time.
The 4 Sevens deal was to follow an increasingly familiar pattern. After 2 years, the club began to get into debt. At this point, secretly, Eric Morgan withdrew his £15,000 stake in the venture. Paul Monks found out afterwards.
I then had my bank statements, and I find that this money had been taken away from the company and that the borrowing had gone up by 15,000. When I asked him about it, he said, well, it was my intention to take my money out as soon as possible at any event, and so should you. Well, I was hardly in a position to do that then, was I?
Eric Morgan was a sleeping partner in the company that ran the club. Only 2 people could sign company cheques. They were Monks and Morgan's sister, Caris Williams. Paul Monks never found out how Morgan got his £15,000 out of the company.
We were being squeezed by our creditors, principally, amongst them was the Inland Revenue. And the outcome of it was that they placed a winding up order on the company.
Eric Morgan again disappeared. It was the same familiar pattern. At the critical period for the company, Paul Monks was completely unable to contact his partner.
Were you trying to contact
I
him?
tried to contact him numerous times.
Do you think that he got the message that you were trying to contact him?
Yes, I think so. I'm quite sure he did. I used to pass the message through his sister, and he would telephone her every day, so yes, I'm sure he did.
But he never contacted you?
But he never came near.
At that time, Paul Monks lived here. Without Morgan's support, he'd borrowed heavily to try to save the club. He ran up big debts.
I sold a house I had, which I was living in, a very nice house, and that provided most of that money, actually.
So as far as you were concerned, you paid off your personal debts within the company?
I had to.
What about Eric Morgan? What did it cost him?
Well, nothing.
In fact, by this time in the early 1980s, Eric Morgan was on the crest of a wave. He'd moved to Guernsey and was enjoying the life of a tax exile. The name of the game was now offshore companies. They were shrouded in the secrecy laws of tax havens like the Channel Islands. He bought this house outside St. Peter Port, the Guernsey capital. He paid £250,000 for it in 1980. In Guernsey, Eric Morgan became friendly with Pat Donaldson. Morgan had bought his house through Donaldson, an estate agent. Morgan persuaded Donaldson to join him in a business venture. They leased this property to open a disco and restaurant. Yet again, the deal went sour. It led to a court case, and Morgan won.
I've ended up paying Morgan, I believe, 40-some-odd thousand pounds by the time of court damages, interest, my lawyer's fees. I estimate I've probably lost through this association something like 100 to 200,000 pounds, possibly more.
When they started together, they planned a business in St Sampson's, Guernsey's second town. They were to put in £15,000 each. But Donaldson hadn't got the immediate cash. He borrowed his share from Morgan. They opened up here. Almost immediately there were problems, and Pat Donaldson began to put in cash to try to stave off closure.
When we closed down, by then I'd put something like 45,000 into the company. And I had a letter from Mr. Morgan saying, well, he wanted his 15,000 back, plus interest. And when I went and see him and said, well, look, you know, I've put more than you in actual fact, so I'm well over. It's you that really owes me money, but I says, I haven't asked you for it. His reply was, sorry, son, you've got nothing in writing saying I'm a partner, but I've got it in writing saying you owe me £15,000. So, which came as a big shock to me, because I thought he was an honourable man up till that time.
Eric Morgan sued Pat Donaldson in Guernsey. Morgan claimed he was never a partner. The case got to court 3 years later, in 1985. One witness who gave evidence was Charles Pithers. He said he was a nominee director in the company that ran the disco. He said the company belonged to Pat Donaldson and Eric Morgan. But Eric Morgan, on oath, said, I wouldn't go into partnership with anyone. He said he'd only loaned Donaldson the money.
The only time I could have proved with 3 witnesses that he'd been introduced as my partner, he brought a witness over from Jersey to state that he couldn't have been in my office at that day because he was in Jersey and flew out to London with this witness.
Did the court believe that witness?
Yes, they believed that witness. I remember their lawyer, not the exact words, but to the effect of, I mean, who are you going to believe? This man is one of us.
And who was this man?
The man was Richard Martin.
Richard Martin knew Morgan since the Esplanade deal. Now he told the court on oath he was with Morgan at the time of the key meeting. But 3 other people, Pat Donaldson, Charles Pithers, and a woman we've traced who wasn't in court, say Morgan was with them. He couldn't have been with Martin.
Are you in any doubt at all that he was a partner of Mr. Donaldson's?
No, I'm in no doubt at all. He was a partner.
Are you in any doubt at all that the day that he and Mr. Martin said that they were flying to London together, he was in the office at a meeting at which you attended?
Yes, that's right. He was definitely there that morning. There's no way he could be flying there unless he did it much later in the day.
5 years ago, Eric Morgan sold his Guernsey mansion for nearly £500,000. It was almost double the price he'd paid. He bought a modest house in the island's capital. It's there we went to try and meet him. We'd been telephoning him for a month on a number here. But even here, he's a man of mystery. One person we spoke to thought he'd moved a year ago. He's virtually unknown to some of the neighbours. Next week, in this special investigation, we tell how Eric Morgan expanded his empire into Europe. We also tell the inside story of how he helped to finance an international fraud.